Thank you for the invitation. I'm very impressed by the community's commitment to investing in children, to making sure that people can have the opportunity to reach their full potential and to grow and contribute. As labor economists, we study for many decades, for 100 years, we studied adults. We studied who's the most productive, who earns the most money, who produces the most things. And we did that only by looking at adults. We did that by looking at what kind of job you have, what industry you work in, what occupation you have. But about 30 years ago, we realized, wait a second, if you want to understand how productive somebody is going to be as an adult, you have to understand what happens to them before they're an adult. Because people grow and develop through a process. You all are in health and medicine. You understand that, but it took economists many decades before we started to understand that and use our tools to try to quantify and understand the impacts of these early experiences on people's whole lives and their adulthood. So what I hear a lot of excitement about from the speakers earlier in the morning is trying to quantify, trying to understand how do we make the case, how do we illustrate the importance of early experiences, the first 1,000 days, the first few years of life, even before birth. How do we make the argument and generate the knowledge to know how to do that investment well, how to design policies and programs to support families and children's development so that they can get good payoff throughout their whole lives. I'm going to tell you some of the work that we've done in the United States, share some of the analyses that we've done, and hopefully it will spark some ideas for you about ways that you can look at communities here and kinds of analysis you can do here, or we can talk about doing together. So the big argument, the main idea that I want you to keep in mind throughout is that, at least in the United States, and I imagine here as well, there's a huge shortage of investment in children, especially young children. There's a shortage of public investment and a shortage of private investment from families because there's this big shortage, that means there's a big opportunity. Because if you can bring more resources to this opportunity, you can generate high returns. You can get big returns. Because right now, there's a lot of things pushing away from investing. So I'm going to show you evidence that income-based gaps in skills, so children from high-income families versus children from low-income families. These gaps in the children's skills open up early in the first few years of life. And once they hit kindergarten, so age 5, 6, 7, all the way to 18, adolescence, the gaps are very stable. You have to change what happens in the first few years. I'm going to show you that those gaps are not inevitable. Those gaps can be changed. The inequality that we see between children from different types of families, different types of communities, some people think those are baked in, those are fixed, those are just different kinds of people with different genes. But that's wrong. You can break those relationships. You can change those relationships. And I'm going to talk about, as an economist, we talk a lot about market failures. We think about why isn't society allocating investment optimally? What are the opportunities for the public to fix these problems through policy? And what it means is when there's market failures that block investment from going in, you get too little investment. But that also means, again, if there's a shortage of investment, it means that if you do invest, you're going to get high returns. The last thing, I'm going to focus a lot on child care, early care and education. And in that setting, I want to emphasize that if you create public subsidies, the quality of the care really matters. So the first argument, income-based skill gaps open up early, and then they stabilize. So this graph is a graph from I used to work at the White House Council of Economic Advisors. This is a graph from a report that we published. And what it shows is two groups of children. The blue line on top are children from the richest 1/5 of families, the richest 20% of families. And the orange line at the bottom is children from the poorest 20% of families. And as you go from here, this is at birth, age 1, to age 14, 15 years old. What you see is that the average skill, average cognitive skill or achievement of the children, it starts off very close together. And in the first few years of life, this gap opens up. So the children start to separate by if their family is rich or if their family is poor. And right around, it gets the biggest around age 5. And then after age 5, it stays about the same. What happens at age 5? In America, in age 5, everybody starts kindergarten. Before age 5, we don't really have anything. So in those first 5 years of life, it's just the families that are responsible. And so differences in family resources lead to differences in child development. Once everybody is eligible for public school, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, elementary school, then the gap stops growing. So the trick is, I think, to start investing earlier. Better experiences can help break this relationship. So this is going to be something similar. This is from a study that I did with Greg Duncan in 2013. And it was an experiment. Okay, this is a random controlled trial. We didn't do the experiment. Some other people did it before, but we reanalyzed the data. And in this experiment, they recruited about 1,000 families at the hospital when they were giving birth to the children. And this was in 8 different hospitals all over America, in different cities all over. They recruited, a few hundred families in each hospital, and they were all low birth weight, and they were all premature. And this is I'm going to tell you about the children who were high low birth weight, so they were close to normal weight. So you have hundreds and hundreds of families giving birth to children in hospitals. There's nothing they're all, there's a lot of variation, but we're going to flip a coin hundreds of times, and if it comes up heads, treatment, comes up tails, control. There's nothing systematically different about treatment and control. Same kind of families, same kind of communities, same kind of genes, same kinds of parents. But if it comes up heads, treatment, then you get some services. You get access to, for starting at age 12 months, at 1 year old, you get access to a free, full-day, high-quality child care center, child development center, that the experimenters set up in each city. And you get transportation. They have a little bus that comes, picks the kid up and takes the child to the center, if the parent wants. They run that, so at the beginning, before the Child Development Center access started, they measured all the kids. They gave them developmental tests. And there was no difference between the treatment group and the control group at 12 months, at the beginning of access to the center. And I'm going to tell you, this is the children from low-income families, okay? But after 1 year, the treatment group, the group that had access, just heads versus tails, no other difference. They had IQ scores that were 1.3 standard deviations. That's like 20 IQ points higher in the treatment group on average than the control group. So the children from low-income families who had access to this child development center for 1 year were scoring higher on IQ tests than middle-income, high-income children on average. It was transformative. They were doing incredibly well. And that continued for a second year. So they had 2 years of access to the center. And at age 3, the IQ was 1.6 standard deviations. So about 22 IQ points higher in the treatment group than the control group. And not everyone who was in the treatment group took up the offer of the center, but ignoring that, just the whole treatment group versus the whole control group, just huge differences. So this should tell you, it's not just your genes, it's your experiences, it's the support that you have. And then at age 3, on the child's 3rd birthday, 36 months old, the experiment ends. Nothing after that, okay? But they do follow up, and they contact the families again 2 years later at age 5, 5 years later at age 8, and 15 years later at age 18. And they measure them again, treatment and control, and they estimate treatment effects. So what do you think the treatment effect will be at these later years? Remember, there's no more treatment, no more services after the child's 3rd birthday. So even at age 5, it's 0.6 standard deviations, which is still just enormous. So the children from low-income families in the treatment group were closer to children from high-income families than they were to children from low-income families in the control group, right? It basically mostly closed the gap between high-income and low-income. And even 5 years later, it was still very big. And even 15 years later, it was still substantial. So to me, this is very compelling evidence that early experiences matter. The first 1,000 days, the first 3 years, the experiences you have, the services and investments that you have access to make a big difference. Now I'm going to show you, that's for the children from low-income families. They also included children from higher-income families. And what you found there was there were big effects, like 0.4 standard deviations in IQ is still it's a really big effect. It looks small because it's next to this crazy, enormous effect for low-income children, but 0.4, 0.3, those are large effects. But then after a few years, there was no effect for the children from high-income families. And the idea is, I think, that for children from low-income families, access to this Child Development Center dramatically changed their experiences. It dramatically changed what they went through. For children from higher income families, it was great, but they probably would have had something pretty great anyway. And they had pretty great things, after the experiment ended. And so it didn't make as much of an impact. Even though it was the same treatment, the experiences of the kids without the treatment were very different, right? Another thing that was very interesting from this experiment is that they measured the quality of parenting. They measured the home environment. They measured how do the parents interact with the children. And what they found was, or we did this analysis, what they found was that the children who spent more time in the Child Development Center, the mothers spent less time caring for them. So they were, how many of you are parents? Anybody have children? Yeah. Parenting is hard work. It's very effortful. It takes a lot of energy. There are 168 hours in a week. On average in the United States, children are under age 5 are outside the care of their parents 19 hours a week. So for parents, they still have 149 hours a week of parenting on average, and that is a lot of hours that you're responsible for parenting. And so what we found was that if you let parents parent less, they actually can parent better. It gives some relief to the parent and lets them do a better job as a parent when they're on duty, if they have a little bit of less time on duty. Does that make sense? So what this shows is that we broke the sample up into different groups by type of parent, and we show that the dots are different types of parents, and on the horizontal here it shows how much did parenting time fall. So it went, for some parents, parenting time didn't change very much. For other types of parents, it changed a lot. And then on the vertical, it shows how much did the quality of parenting change. So what you see is that the parents who were parenting much less, 15 hours a week less, the quality of their parenting went up a lot. And for parents who didn't change their parenting type quantity very much, the parenting quality didn't change very much. So there's a strong, so we think about non-parental care as something that has an effect on the child when they're there, but it can also change the child's experience at home by relieving the parent and giving them some energy to do a better job as a parent. We also looked at this high-quality care effect, and we compared it against what would happen if you just gave the families money. So this care is expensive, it's high quality, and some people will say, well, let's just give the money to the parents. Let's not worry about providing care. They know the best. They can do with the money what they want. And I'm sympathetic as an economist. Always, you want to support people's decisions. But what we found was that in our simulations was that the effect would be much smaller on the children's development, on their cognitive skill, if you just give the cash to the parents compared to if you subsidize high quality care. Because subsidizing high quality care means the money goes into the child. It goes into them through high quality experiences. If the money goes to the parent, it can go a lot of places. And so if the public is investing in order to improve the child's life and improve the child's development, it can make sense to focus on providing services to the child rather than money to the parents. This is a table. You can't read it. It's too small, but I just want to show you that this is a paper by Nobel laureate James Heckman. He looked at a different experiment that was done, but a similar kind of experiment called Perry Preschool. And he looked at, it had big effects on the kids' development. Again, random controlled trial, some get it, some don't. Watch the kid develop over many years. They had data into the children's adulthood, 40, 50 years old. They can see them in the labor market. They can see them in the police records. Did they get arrested? Did they commit crimes? And they calculated the total economic impact of the Perry Preschool experiment. They said, look, we have to pay this money up front, the cost of the program, but then we get a whole stream of impacts across the children's lives. So we might save money in school. We don't have to provide special education services. They might not get held back a grade. They earn more in the labor market. They're more productive. They commit less crime, so there's less harm created in the community. And economists, we can total that up. We can take account of the time value of costs and benefits. And he calculated what's called an internal rate of return. So basically, like, if you invest this money now through childcare, it's going to generate a stream of benefits far in the future. That's the same way if a company invests in a machine, it costs money up front to buy the manufacturing equipment, but then you get to produce a lot and sell, and it creates a stream of benefits in the future. So this is the same way of analyzing the value of an investment decision that companies use, but we can also use it to look at the rate of return for social programs. And what he found, they did a lot of different checks, but what they found was the real rate of return on this program was something like conservatively 5.8, like 8 or 10%. So all the numbers down in the corner there are above 8, 7.7, 8.3, 8.6 rate of return. That sounds like, that's a pretty good return. You can compare it to the stock market. So if we leave money in the private sector, it's going to generate returns through investments. If we leave it in the private economy, it's going to be invested in companies and productivity. And the stock market is a good summary of that. So what's the return to private money left in the stock market? It's about 6% over all the years since World War II. This program, investing in kids, pays off about 8%, something like that, conservatively. So that's higher. I want to tell you, 8 and 6 sound very similar, but 8% return over 50 years is much more than double 6%. So the blue line shows you A 0% return, you put in $1, you get out $1. The red line shows you a 6% return. You put in $1, you get out almost $20. An 8% return, you put in $1, you get something like $50 at the end. So investing in kids is a very good return, and it makes sense from an economic perspective to take money, tax businesses, tax income, tax private activities, and pull those funds into the public sector and invest them in children, because it delivers a higher return. I think that kind of argument is the kind of argument I hear you all are interested in, and that's the case here. So how is it that the payoff can be so high? Like, as an economist, this is puzzling. Like, if the returns are so high, why aren't families already doing it? Why isn't the public already doing it? If it's so profitable, we would expect money to go towards it. So there's 3 big market failures that prevent investment in young children. And solving these shortages can drive high public return on investment. So many parents want to invest more, but they can't borrow. They're poor. When your children are young, you are young, and you don't have a lot of resources, and it's tough to borrow enough money to cover the expenses. So I'll say more about this, but the first thing is many parents want to invest more, but they just can't get the resources to do so. The second thing is, from the perspective of society, even if parents invested just as much as they want, there would still be too little investment, because investing in those kids when they're young, it pays off for the kid, and it pays off for the parent who cares about the kid, but it also pays off for all that kid's future neighbors. It pays off for their future employers, their coworkers. It's going to pay off when they're an adult for many decades, but those people can't contribute money to get those returns because they're in the future, and these processes are happening now. So there's no way for all those future neighbors to say, I want to help that kid have a good experience because they're going to be my neighbor in 30 years, and I want them to be a productive, functional person instead of somebody who's really struggling. And so the inability to make those transfers is a market failure. And the way that we solve those is through policy. The way we solve it is say, okay, we know that this has big benefits in the future, so we're just going to put public resources into this. Right now, parents bear the full cost of creating healthy, developmentally appropriate environments for children, but they don't get all the benefits. Other people get the benefits. And so they don't put enough in. The last big market failure for care is that the quality of care is very difficult to judge. Parents are not there while the care is being produced. The children can't judge or report quality. So it's tough for policymakers to recognize high quality care and to assure high quality care, and so it's hard to justify big investments. So the first argument was that parents don't invest enough because they don't have access to resources. And this is a brief that I worked on when I was at the White House Council of Economic Advisors. You can find it online. Basically the argument is that families have the least private resources when they're young, when their children are young, and the public makes the situation worse by putting in the least public resources when children are young. And so there's less public, there's less private, and it does require resources to produce care. So when your children are young, if your children are 0 to 2 or 3 to 5 years old, parents' wages are low. As the children age, the parents age, they get more experience, they get more education maybe, so they can earn higher wages. Now I make more than I did when my children were young. And that's what the blue bars say, is when your children are young, as a parent, your wages are lower than they are later. So you have less current earning power when your children are young. When your children are young, you've also had less time to save. So you have less past income, you have less current earning power. You do have more future income when your kids are young, but you have less access to future income because people have lower credit scores when they're young and when their kids are young. So this is an analysis of credit scores by the age, for parents, by the age of their youngest child. And what it shows is that as children age, parents' access to credit goes up. So when your kids are youngest, you have the least past income, you have the least current earning power, and you have the least access to future income. Past, present, future, that's all the kinds of income. You have less when your kids are young. So when your kids are young, families are poor relative to what they will be later. There's not a lot of private resources to invest. There's also not a lot of public resources. So this shows total public investment in the US across the federal government, state governments, local governments, in family, in children by the age of the child. So it's by child year. This is from a report that I did at the Hamilton Project, Brookings, with Liz Davis. And what we found, this is across health, housing, cash, childcare, education, everything. When kids are youngest, we spend about $7,500 per child per year, the public, across all programs and levels of government. Once they're in kindergarten, age 6 to 18, it's twice as much. It's twice as much. So we, as a public, invest more when kids are older than when they're younger, even though parents have less resources. And I'm just also going to say, if you look at how much we invest or spend on adults who are 65 and older, we spend over $30,000 per year through Social Security, things like that. So we're investing, 5 times more, 4 times more per senior, which is, good, bless them. They've worked hard, they need support. But we're missing out on the chance to invest in young people. And if you look at, if you focus only on care and education, focus, don't look at health or housing, things like that. Just focus on care and education. In K-12, kindergarten to 12th grade, from age 5 to 18, in America, we spend about $13,000 per year per child across each of those 13 years. But in the first 2 years of life, we only
invest about $1,000 per child per year. And in the first 5 years, it's only about $2,500 per child per year. So this first 5 years of life, we're investing 9 times less than once they turn age 5 or age 6. So this is a huge investment shortage, right? It makes sense that we're investing once they're 5. It doesn't make sense that we're investing in the first 5 years. It's a big opportunity. Parents don't have the resources then. They do have more resources later, but public policy could be making the situation more balanced, but instead, public policy is just reinforcing the imbalance. I'm going to skip this one, but this one is just on time. You see something very similar. If you look at how much share of children's time is spent in subsidized settings versus not. So as a result, if you look by the age of the child, 0, 2, 3 or 4 years old, 5 or 6 years old, and then you split out by parent education, what you see is that once children are 5 or 6, there's not much inequality. There's very similar child experiences for children from, families that are more disadvantaged. The parent maybe didn't finish high school, or families whose parents have a lot of education, more advantaged in green. But in the first few years of life, there's a big difference. The children from the more advantaged families are having very different experiences than the children whose parents have less formal education, who have less income, earning power, and less resources. So in the first few years of life, there's this inequality in children's experiences. Once they hit K-12 system, public education system, elementary school, the gaps go away. I don't think it's a coincidence that the first slide I showed you, that the skills gap opens up in the first 5 years of life and then stops growing once the children's experiences become more equal. So another aspect of this is the care sector itself. I'd like to learn more about Italy in this regard. I'm going to tell you about America. So the quality of that care that children get really matters, and the quality of the care is strongly related to the people producing the care and the quality of the jobs that there are in the sector to produce that care. And I want you to guess, so here are 3 occupations. These are jobs in the American economy for people who take care of pets. They are like run doggy daycare, they have animal caretakers. There's people who take care of young children, those are child care workers. And then there's people who take care of cars and trucks. They look after them, they're in a parking lot, they make sure nobody hurts the cars. How much do you think, who gets the lowest wage? Child care workers get the lowest wage. We pay more to the people who watch our trucks than the people who watch the children. Why is that? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but the economics of producing care and education are very unforgiving. They're very difficult because, I was a college professor. I can teach dozens of college students. There's a big lecture hall. One adult can educate and care for hundreds of students at the same time, or dozens of students at the same time. In But for infants and toddlers, for preschool age 3 and 4, you can't split the adult very much, you know? You need one adult with 3 children, with 4 children, with 10 children, maybe. So it's very expensive in that way. And there's no way out of this. This is just like, you don't want to put 10 babies with one adult. That's not good. So, you know, one parking lot attendant can watch 100 cars, but one childcare teacher can only watch a few children. There's no way out of this. You can't do it cheaply and do it well. How am I doing on time? Yeah, good. Okay. So another aspect of this is that if you want to make a career in childcare, then you're going to face this low pay. And there's a big inequality between sectors. So if you are a worker in a childcare sector, you're on the blue line here. These are people, this is data on people, childcare workers in Minnesota who have a college degree. They have a bachelor's degree or more. And then on the bottom, you have how many years of experience they have, basically. And what you see is that they make about $17 an hour on average, and it doesn't grow with their experience. They make $17 an hour at the beginning of their career, they make $17 an hour at the end of their career. It's just very flat. There's no career development, there's no returns to staying in the sector. But if you work in K-12, in the public school system, if you have a bachelor's degree, you start off around $26 an hour, and it grows to almost $40 an hour by the end of your career. So again, you see this inequality reinforced. So, you know, we have this, 9 times more investment per child per year once they're in school compared to when they're young. And it turns into low pay for childcare workers. You can't split the adult very much. The money can't go very far unless you're spending more per child. And it turns into low wages. And in a sector, a different kind of care and education, once the child is 5 or 6 years old, all of a sudden we start paying 9, 10 times more, and all of a sudden you can have wages that are actually competitive. You can attract people to the sector. You can produce good care and education. So what else could we possibly expect in the first 5 years of life except a crisis of shortage of resources for families where the parents are struggling, they don't have enough, they're trying to work and earn and trying to afford care and trying to balance earning and caring, and they're stuck and they're stressed out and they're stretched. And the childcare sector never has enough openings. It's hard to find a slot. The costs are very expensive for families. There's never, they can't afford it. The pay is too low for the workers. There's turnover. They can't find enough people to work there. The providers are always closing down and reopening. It's a lot of instability. What else could we expect except this? Because families don't have enough private resources, and the public isn't putting in enough public resources. The sector doesn't have enough resources. So you get chaos, you get like a shortage of investment and high quality experiences for children. The quality of care really matters. This is probably too much detail for me to walk through, but the basic idea is that depending on if your family has less resources or more resources, you know, the family will be able to afford and produce sort of increasing levels of quality care through its own resources. If the family has more resources, that's the blue line. And then if you come in with a subsidized quality of a subsidized care program, let's say it has a low quality or it could have a high quality. What matters is the difference in the quality between the thing that you provide and the thing that the child would get otherwise. So the same program quality can have negative effects on some kids and positive effects on other kids, because the more disadvantaged children would be getting low quality experiences, and so this new opportunity is better than that. But for high income families, if you subsidize low quality care and make it free, some of them will go take it because it's free, but it might actually make the children worse off because it's pulling them out of a better developmental environment into a low quality public option. So quality really matters. If you're going to subsidize something, if you're going to make it cheap and accessible, it better be pretty high quality, because people are going to want it and take it, and then you end up spending money to subsidize hurting children. You pull in kids to care that is worse, and now you're paying public money to actually hurt children. That's not a good situation. You want to have high quality. You want to make sure it serves to create better opportunities for kids, not worse. So there's a lot of program design that goes into that. But it is possible. When in the city of Boston, public schools, they created a pre-kindergarten program, and they made it very high quality. And again, this is kind of an experiment. There were not enough slots. There were not enough spaces in the program for all the children who wanted it. So they basically flipped coins to see who would get in. They ran a lottery to 100 families wanted to get in, but only 25 spaces were available. So they flipped coins to see who gets in, and they follow those kids out, 18 years or 15 years, and they measured the outcome of the kids who were able to access the program or the ones who weren't. And what they found was that access to this high quality pre-K program boosted 6 percentage points more likely to graduate high school, 8.5 percentage points more likely to take the college admissions exam, 8 percentage points more likely to enroll in college on time. But there weren't effects on test scores. There were like less bad behaviors by children, less suspensions for fights and things in school, less incarceration of adolescents. So there were good effects on college attainment, on graduation, on behavioral and crime, but no impact on test scores. So test scores are not a very reliable indicator, far away from the intervention. But again, there are other pre-K programs that have been run in other places, like in Tennessee, where they didn't get positive effects. They got negative effects. And this one cost like twice as much as the one in Tennessee. They spent a lot more in Boston per child than they did in Tennessee. This one had positive effects. That one had negative effects. So quality really matters. And the quality of the jobs, I think, is part of it. If you want to invest in these things, there's a lot of policy options. You can do public production of care, open up public child care centers. In the US, we have Head Start, things like that, school-based public pre-K. But you can also subsidize consumers. You can create vouchers or scholarships that basically say, here's money that you can take to a child care provider in the community and pay them, and they will watch your kid, and the government will provide a payment to them, a private production. Or you can give a tax credit for families that spend on child care. So there's a lot of, or you can also subsidize the producers directly. You can pay providers, private providers. There's a bunch of different options there. We did a study in Minnesota of the impact of expanding consumer subsidies. And what we found, there's a lot of concern that if you give consumers these subsidies and boost demand, that you want to expand the number of kids who have access, but you don't want the price to go up a lot. You don't want other families to have to face higher prices. And what we found in Minnesota was that there was a big effect on quantity, so the sector expanded a lot, but prices barely changed at all. So this is a common objection that you hear for subsidies, is that it'll raise prices. And it might if you do it really big, but at least at this level, we didn't see that. So the big challenges for ECE policy are providing adequate resources, providing quality assurance, and there's a lot of details there about how to do it, especially because quality is very difficult to judge. It can make more sense to do public production instead of private contracting out, because if you can't judge quality very well, it's kind of risky to give a lot of money to a private provider. They might push quality down to make more profit. So just a caution there. This is evidence from an experiment, a quasi-experiment that was run a long time ago in Tennessee. And what it showed was that children were randomly assigned to kindergarten teachers. And what they found was that in the first year after you had this randomly assigned teachers, some kids did really well, some kids did worse. So they have this measure of the quality of your kindergarten class, and it showed up on test scores. But then a few years later, they looked at the effect on test scores, and there wasn't much of an effect. And so people talk about fade out. We saw that in the graph that I showed you at the beginning. We saw like a fade down. And I want to caution you that you shouldn't, the fact that you don't see effects on test scores later is not very informative, because when they went and they looked at the labor market outcomes at age 30, they found that there were effects. They found that the kids who were in the high-quality kindergarten classes were earning more money in adulthood, even though they didn't have higher test scores, in the intervening years. And that's very similar to this, where there was these pre-K program where they had access to this high-quality program. There were no effects on test scores, but that's not very informative. You really have to follow up and see the effects on adult outcomes. So, in conclusion, I think it's really important to look at experimental evidence and quasi-experimental evidence. It can tell us and show us in a very convincing way, because there's no systematic difference between the groups. But if you change the experiences or the resources available to certain kids and not others, or certain parents and not others, it really changes the trajectory of kids' lives. And it can't be genetics, that's conditional on genetics. A lot of research just looks at correlations. It says, like, this type of person has this type of outcome versus that type of person has that type of outcome. It's not enough to get really strong evidence. It's suggestive, but to get really strong evidence, you need something like an experiment. It doesn't literally have to be an experiment. Economists have a lot of tools to understand impacts without experiments, but you need something more than just correlations. I would encourage you all to focus on levers, studying levers that policymakers can pull. So not just thinking about broad categories of people, but thinking about what are the policy levers that the society can move, and what are the impacts of moving those levers. And there's a lot of rationale for care subsidies. There's a lot of potential designs for care policy, and happy to talk about those, anyone interested. So thank you so much. It's me.